Tiny homes. From millions of views of tiny home videos on YouTube to zoning considerations, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the tiny home movement. On this Bernie Chats with Daniel Sanderson, we'll be talking about them. Let's get started. So everybody meet Daniel. Daniel works for a metal fabrication company that started a division that is making tiny homes. He also happens to be involved with a startup platform that helps authors getting to the next level with their publications and with their writing process. We're going to get into the tiny home topic, and then we're going to branch off into a separate Bernie Chats episode, and we're going to talk about the authorship website. Daniel, do you want to tell us a little more about yourself and maybe speak to that, especially to the tiny home aspect for this episode?
Yeah, thanks, Bernie. The tiny homes has been an endeavor that has been several years in the making, as you can imagine, to be involved with the design and manufacturing process from the ground up. I operate in the world as a consultant. And one of my clients a few years ago, I had the pleasure of starting a project with him, really from the ground up. He developed a line of homes. They are small homes, so they do fit in that category of tiny homes, but they also fit in a high-end niche and a little bit of the narrative towards minimal lifestyle and simplicity. So there's a lot of engineering and research that has to go into making a living space not only comfortable but high performing and valuable for the marketplace.
And of course, for your organization, which I got to know quite a bit when we were producing videos for the parent company, they're quite a high-end metal fabrication company that produces metal facades.
They are going to be architecturally inspired homes.
Right.
But quite often in throughout British Columbia, where we do a lot of our work, we are known in the industry for doing very high quality work. And when we launched the tiny structures or small dwellings, as Befama Homes likes to call them, we wanted to emphasize more on the monumental status. And so in an architectural classification, monumental is in fact the highest quality of architectural design and building structure that you can imagine. And the reason for that high status is simply because it's reserved for cultural buildings. You wouldn't build something like the Sydney Opera House with a life cycle of 20 years. You want to build it for a cultural life cycle, so you want it to last for multiple generations. And that was the approach that we took with these small dwellings.
Yeah, and I think that's good for people to know, because for the tiny houses, it kind of speaks to the quality and the attention to detail and engineering that a company of your caliber would want to put into designing anything they do or build. And so now you're building tiny homes, and you're going to probably have that same methodology of going through the different steps from an architectural and a structural point of view. So why did the company decide to create tiny homes in the first place?
As we know, markets change, societies change, the needs for societies change, and I think the entrepreneurs that are able to pivot, adapt, and produce things that the market truly needs and is looking for, then these are the companies that will be successful in the future. We do want to do something that's more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. And so there's a conscious movement towards that as well. So there's kind of a couple complementary contributors to move in that direction.
For people that aren't familiar with tiny homes, what is a tiny home?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bernie. So essentially, a tiny home is anything around that 400 square foot marker. Okay. And there's a history of tiny homes. And I think anybody that were to look it up on the internet, you'll find that it is that size of approximately 400 square feet of living space. And the movement, in fact, actually started and originated from a group of people that really wanted to circumvent traditional mortgages and wanted to
Mm.
focus their lifestyle around not being a I'll use scare quotes here, a slave, to their mortgage. And
Mm.
that's a valid perspective. I can understand it. I think, and that's the point that we want to kind of acknowledge, is that I can understand how people would perceive it that way. Now, in our society, residing yourself to building equity has a lot of obvious upsides, and has made and produced a lot of wealth for a lot of people throughout North America and worldwide. So, like, just to reemphasize, the idea of the tiny house and the tiny house movement, tiny home movement, was essentially to try and say there's an alternative lifestyle, that we don't need to get caught into that trap, right?
Mm.
Of constantly working for a mortgage, sort of thing, right?
So Daniel, there is, as you put it, a movement. It's quite a large movement, actually. And if anybody who goes online and looks up on YouTube tiny homes will find probably thousands, if not tens of thousands, of videos that have been nicely produced describing all kinds of interesting tiny homes. On that note, how does the tiny home movement align with the concept of minimalism?
Oh, they pretty much dovetail immediately from the concept of inception. The idea here is that you're living in a space that has a smaller square footage, and just by the sheer definition of it being small, tiny, alternative to like a larger square footage single family home, you have no choice but to actually live with less consumables. Now, I want to give you a little bit of a two scenario sort of example here. So first would be, obviously prior to COVID, because I'm not doing much traveling these days, but the family and I, we would get on a plane and we would go to Hawaii for a vacation. And I remember ending up in a condo, or a various different timeshare location. I guess it depends on where we were scheduling our accommodations. But quite often when we went to Hawaii, we would find places that had like an in-kitchen suite, and so we would balance eating out and then also eating in the space. Now, my point is that when we arrived in these places, the square footage was quite small. And I remember the feeling of, hey, I could live in this space. And it was quite an easy sort of migration into this smaller square footage. And it felt just fine. There was no issue. Another example is I grew up around campfires in the summertime, right? So my parents would take me camping, and to like keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, we would have RVs and motorhomes and trailers, and we would go on camping trips, probably like a lot of people. And we never really found that the trailer, or that mobile unit, was actually oppressive. It was times in the summer where we spent a lot of time outdoors and this
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. So it automatically kind of encourages that type of lifestyle.
So, in my perfect tiny home vision, there are not one tiny home, there are two or three tiny homes, all
Mhm.
configured together. And I have a few different layouts that I've actually sketched on paper of how that would work. One of them is two side by side and one running across on top on the roof of them. So I have rooftop sun decks, right? So in that scenario, one of those three or two or three units could be half office and half in-law suite, or even all in-law suite. So I think that could be a really interesting concept too, where you could have three tiny homes on one lot, and one of them could be the in-laws, one of them could be the office, and one of them could be your living space with your spouse and perhaps a little one.
There's actually a rendering on the site that somewhat shows a few of those examples. I'd love to show them to you.
Okay, that looks beautiful.
Yeah, now you can drag that and spin that around so that you can kind of get a 3D.
Okay, that's a great concept.
Yeah,
Why no windows on this side?
it's highlighting that we can do a facade with metal, and
Okay.
quite often there's usually a door on that side. Basically, there's ways to mix and match these, just as you've described how you envisioned, two units and then one stacked on top of each other. There's this possibility, and what the website itself actually represents is just examples, right? So if somebody came to us and said, well, I want to stack 3 this way and 4 that way, and I've got a sloped property, and no problem. So anything that somebody sees on the website is kind of a starting point for ideas. Now, when you go down further on that one page, there's a really nice rendering of a nice
Is that the one? Oh,
young.
hang on, I'll switch to the screen again. Can you see it now?
Yeah, that's it
Okay,
right
great.
there. Where this maybe like a young woman is actually going to be walking up the stairs. So
Right.
she's going into her separate unit upstairs.
Right.
Now, if, for example, she had parents that were living in the downstairs sort of area, well, it's like floor level, right? So you can, I mean, as people get older, they're concerned about, wheelchair access and not having to walk upstairs. So,
Right.
You could do things like put an elevator in, or just have a proper wheelchair thing. There's lots of modifications that this particular manufacturer can do. Now, you'll also notice that there's a considerable amount of concrete and metal stairs. So all of this is all produced out of that facility.
Okay.
The vertical black strips that you see are accented black Akoya, and they're meant to help with daylighting. As you scroll down a little bit further, you'll see a citywide dwell, or a city dwell wide, and this is much bigger. And I think this one will speak a little bit to what you were referring to about having them stack. Okay, so if you go down to the bottom image, and you'll see a middle-aged guy, maybe a little bit more. He's got a little gray in his beard and his hair and stuff, but he's coming down the stairs.
Right.
So the ground floor is intended for, say, for example, an aging couple or individual. And then the top is more like a caretaker suite in a way, right? So you can have a separate entrance for, let's say, in the time of COVID, you have somebody that's upstairs that manages and is maybe a caregiver to the people below, right? And so that's kind of the concept. All things are possible. That's one of the things that anybody who stumbles on this that has any kind of interest in it, realize that there's nothing cast in stone that says this is how your home has to be. It's very customizable, right? So if there was a need for a staircase inside the unit, no problem. It can just be designed in right from the beginning.
So if it can be conceived, it could be achieved.
As long as it doesn't break any engineering or physics rules, right?
Yes, I would imagine. So which one did you want me to visit here, Daniel?
So if you go to the gallery, and
Gallery.
this is a good place to look at, the various different solutions.
So I noticed here that these are approximately 850 square feet, and that would be a double home, a double tiny home. And for people who, are in metric or don't really know the measurements, 850 square feet is about the size of a small to medium 2-bedroom apartment or a very large 1-bedroom apartment with den, let's say.
Oh, well, and scroll down, because then the city dwell wide challenges again, it shows the higher square footage, to 1,700 square feet, right? So
right, and this is a very open concept.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can really, just start to imagine, a nice U-shaped kitchen and a dining room and a bedroom off the side, a couch area. Like, there's quite a nice living space.
This is very fascinating stuff. It really gets one to think out of the box about what they require for their own personal home space.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to the gallery. This is a fascinating idea for a chalet or a cottage at the lake. This is just awesome.
One of the signature benefits of Befama tiny home is that it's got a 4-point pedestal system. So if we're talking about interrupting or integrating into the biodiversity of your lot, there's only a 4 square foot interruption. So basically, the pedestal only requires a 1 foot by 1 foot hole. You drill down into that hole, and so you can see there's a pedestal system that is in the snow, and so the entire unit does have a structural foundation, but it has a very minimal ecological footprint. There's a lot of innovation put into these units for that exact reason. Mm-hmm.
With a home like this, how transferable is it? If somebody, let's just say somebody said, okay, I want to set up a small community or resort of tiny homes, and I want to have 6 chalets there that people could rent, maybe book for a week or a month. And I'm not sure what I want to do with the property in the long run. I might want to change it up. I might want to move it, or I might want to, change my investment. In other words, I might want to liquidate and sell them off one by one. What can you speak to that a little bit? That kind of usage and maybe other usages.
Bernie, I'm actually really excited by that because it feels I have a really good response for somebody that might have that in mind. Okay, so for example, let's say I was looking for a piece of property and I decided to buy 50 of these and go and put them in a new concept of a community, right? Now, let's say for whatever reason, we have no idea why, but we want to move them. Well, the fact that these are mobile to the site means that they're easily mobile to be relocated to a new site, right? And so that pedestal foundation is something that, now I'm just going to use numbers here because I think it gives a proper context.
Sure.
If I was putting one of these on my property, then I would phone up a local contractor or excavator and I would say, look, I need to have 4 holes dug to put these pedestals in. Okay. It's a day's work, it's not a tremendous cost. Once those are in place, then the truck, like you're showing here, can come and the crane can put the unit in place. And now you have a structural foundation. If, for example, you wanted to move it, essentially you have to register the move. You need the proper permits because it is an oversized load, as you can see, but it's quite an easy thing to do. You just get the crane to come, you decouple the unit from the foundation itself, put it on the trailer and move it to a new location. Now, the fact is actually that foundation can also be dug up and repurposed in a new location. So the environmental footprint is like non-existent at that point once the earth recovers.
So you don't have to do any remediation of the property and the land. You don't have to bring anything back into shape except for those few square feet where the pedestals sat.
Exactly. And whether you dug them out or you left them there, I mean, they're just like a concrete, pedestal. And, like I said, it's about a half day's work for an excavator. It's not really like there's a lot of site prep there. It's really like once that truck comes with your new home and it's coupled to the foundation, it's kind of like move-in ready, and put your living materials in there and stock your fridge and hook up your power and your services, and you're basically good to go.
So that's a very environmentally sound solution then.
Yeah, well, yeah, we hope so. And I have to tip my hat off to Greg, who you've met him before, and I'm going to give him a little props. The man's a genius. I really do. He's a really smart guy. He's conceived this project. This is his baby. There's so many things that make this brand and this company so amazing.
I see you guys having complementary skills, which is great because you're coming up with some really great designs here, a lot of environmental forethought and a lot of luxury forethoughts for people that want a tiny home and perhaps want something a little bit higher scale. In watching a lot of tiny home videos, I've noticed there's a certain kind of mindset of people that are going into the tiny homes. They're either looking to downsize or looking to get into a home they can afford. And there seems to be a lot of them that are working digitally, or photographers or designers, people along that line, people that have access to some property but don't necessarily want to stay with the owners of the property, be it their parents or a friend or an uncle or something like that. And there's room on the property to put a second home, and so building a tiny home on that property or putting a tiny home on that property seems to make a lot of sense. So when somebody's considering doing that, whether it's putting it on their property, leasing a property, or making use of some property they have access to, what are the main things they should be considering when looking at a tiny home project?
Well, in my experience, it is a new emerging market, although the tiny house movement has been around since I think the 70s as kind of a reaction to people not getting into the mortgage traps. The thing I think the average consumer has to think about is, unfortunately, a little bit of that buyer beware mentality. There are a lot of regulations from municipality to municipality about residential home construction, and whether it's a small home or a large home. And I have to point out, in defense of the regulations, that the regulations are there to actually protect the general public. So the good questions to ask when you're considering to move into or consider this kind of lifestyle is, are there the appropriate approvals? No one wants to get stuck building their dream home and their lifestyle to find out that it's just simply unattainable.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example. If you and your significant other were thinking about buying one of these homes, and you're looking at 10 potential suppliers of these homes, you would be really, really doing yourself an enormous service by making sure which ones legitimately can actually be put onto a property in terms of approvals. So if only one or two of them have all the appropriate government approvals, then that makes your decision-making process a lot simpler. I think those are really the first questions to ask any manufacturer: is how does that approval process work?
So is that making sure that the home itself is up to code? Is that the way to put it?
That's one real aspect of it. And I know, as a manufacturer, a factory built manufacturer of
Yeah.
homes, that's an extensive process from a national regulation standpoint and also municipal standpoints. There's a lot of things that you have to go through in order to comply with the regulations. You need to be working with professionals that know how those regulations work.
So is it
I
is
do
it
have to advocate for us, but we know how that
Of course.
works, and we've been in that industry, for a long time. Yeah.
Is that fair to say then that there's two sides to it from an approval point of view? There's the building, whether it's up to code or not, and then the second side is the municipality and what the local regulations are for actually having tiny homes on various types of properties.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and then I guess when you're talking to the home manufacturer, they more than likely, if it's in the area, have some idea and can probably guide you a little bit if they know what they're doing on where to get the proper information for the municipality, right?
Yeah. Well, our approach is design centric and customer centric. So
Okay,
what we do is we bring people in, and the municipalities, they do change,
right.
and a lot of times they're site specific. So this is the whole process of submitting for a building permit, right? And so
Okay,
if your company has all of the national approvals and they want to make a submittal into a municipal situation,
right.
then that's the good starting point. And then the municipality will review it, and we work with the clients on that municipal approval.
That's great.
Yeah, so that's a really important thing, and this
Hmm.
this is not a process that we've invented ourselves. This is a standard process that
Hmm.
any individual that wants to build a home
Hmm.
on a residential property, they have to go through that process. They have to submit a building permit. It has to get approved, and there may be certain stipulations. Covenants, for example, are an excellent example. So if you live close to a protected habitat, or you have a stream running through your property, then the covenant associated with that particular property is going to say you need to make the appropriate considerations to protect the habitat of that running stream because it's
Mhm.
ecologically a sensitive area. And so that's a specific site situation that a municipality will really want to try and protect and want to make sure that it's being accommodated for.
So,
Um,
so that makes me think of two aspects that might be involved in that process. One of them is the potential that you might need to gain approval from the neighbors, and the other one is the potential that you might have to go to a city council meeting or a municipal council meeting and present your case. Can you see those as possibly being involved in the process, or are those separate things?
Well, that's an escalated sort of thing. If it's something outside of the norm, then it's called a variance. You have to apply
Hmm.
for a variance, and there possibly could be a hearing, and you do have to make your case and everything. So, this
Yeah.
is again another reason why you want to make and try and comply with as much of the code as possible,
Hmm.
and make a strong case that you're not only meeting it, but you're exceeding it. And so, from our standpoint as a factory built house manufacturer, we approach that very similarly. We look at every decision that we make and figure out how do we exceed the requirements for the building code. When you've accommodated that, that's a huge check mark for you, to be able to offer documentation that you exceed their minimum requirements from a code standpoint.
Yeah, that's
And
huge, and especially
that's
for
huge.
anybody who's purchasing for the first time or is not that familiar with that process. Then I guess number one, it's good for them to be aware that before they put their money in, they should make sure that their money's not going to have to be taken out. They're not making an investment that they're going to have to backtrack on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one thing to add though, Bernie, I also take a little bit more of a an industry role. I
yeah.
consider it part of a responsibility. So I like to facilitate those discussions. I hold,
Mm,
group conversations. I'm active in the community on this type of topic. So
great.
I have an open door policy with people that, want to talk about this subject, right?
Mhm.
Because I think the industry needs support. So if somebody has a question
Yeah.
and they're interested in talking about tiny homes
Mhm.
that has nothing to do with me in an area that I have nothing to do with, I'm more than happy to, engage with people because I think the industry as a whole needs some support and it needs to grow and get some positive growth, and it needs to move with society in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, and I think that speaks really well to your position as a thought leader and your organization's position as thought leaders in that. I mean, you're creating some very innovative housing models and getting that rolling, and that's great. So, what do you see as the three main benefits of moving into a tiny home?
Well, I think by simplifying their life,
Yep.
I've seen time again and again that when people parse down the unnecessary material items in their life, it no longer consumes them as much, and it kind of frees them from the types of things that just occupy our minds, right?
Mm,
Like you have less possessions means there's less maintenance, there's less things that you have to constantly kind of be aware of.
mhm,
And in the culture of minimalism, there is the idea and the phrase of intentional living. It means you recapture back what it means to live an intentional life, and that's kind of permeates the culture of the minimalist. And I think that's got to be really desirable and cathartic for somebody who wants to kind of move their life in that trajectory. It's
great.
an individual choice, really. There are two episodes. One's a movie and one's an actual series that recently just launched, I believe, in January of this year. And the
Okay.
movie is a couple years old,
Mhm.
but it's from two guys called the Minimalists,
Mm,
and it's an excellent series and movie to watch
mhm,
because I think it really nicely highlights the struggle and the development and the realization from two individuals that brand themselves around this concept of living a more intentional life. And
mhm.
so it goes into concepts of tiny homes, it goes into concepts of reducing wardrobe, um, purging unnecessary items from your living space, these types of things. And I think that's a really, really good starting point for people to try and really get a good representation of what that lifestyle is all about.
And so that was the movie, and what's the episodes?
Well, it would be just under the minimalists, right? They
Oh,
have,
I see. I see. So
yeah,
it's the
it's,
movie, and then they branched off into a series.
yeah. And so quite easy to just look up
Sure,
minimalists
on Netflix.
on Netflix.
Yeah,
And
I think I saw the
yeah,
movie a while back, like a couple of years ago, and
yeah.
it paints the topic of minimalism quite well. So one of the things, back to the size of the house, one of the things that I've noticed is that um, you can really leverage the outdoor space when you have a tiny home
Oh,
to
yeah.
create additional living space, et cetera. Of course, when it's raining or snowing, that might be less desirable or less doable. Chances are, if you have a tiny home, you're going to have some property with it, and there's a lot
Mhm.
of benefit in leveraging that outdoor space as well. And I've
Yeah.
seen some where even the roof becomes a rooftop deck, which is great.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to integrate an indoor outdoor
Mhm.
space, and that's something that I personally have been involved with. My entire architectural career has been involved with indoor outdoor spaces.
Okay.
There's lots of options. Once I think people start to think about integrating the outdoors, there's lots of ways to be able to do that. Indoor, outdoor kitchens, um, greenhouses, for example, partially heated spaces. So a space that maybe isn't part of the core heating system of your home,
Right.
but may take advantage of passive solar heating from the position of where windows are on a property in relation to the sun. And so there's lots of ways to start to reimagine how you can integrate your lifestyle into nature. I think once people start investigating that, it kind of snowballs, right? I've seen the transformation for people that really enjoy being outside,
Mm.
whether it's working in a garden, having a greenhouse, a solarium, or just spending more time outside, right, on their property or in their community. One of the things that really differentiated our endeavor and our project was
Sure.
this concept of minimalism without compromise.
Hmm.
And the reason behind that, slogan, if you want to call it such, it's that there's a lot of small houses, tiny houses, simplistic living situations that feel like hyper compact in terms of the spaces. And I know that when I have asked some colleagues, friends, family, we are fairly certain that people, especially as you're getting a little bit older, don't want to live and sleep on a bed, for example, that you have to climb a ladder to every night. They want to have all the benefits of living in a really nice space without feeling like they're giving up something.
Hmm.
And so I know that that was the ethos or the design intent as we were building these units,
Mm.
was to say, hey, you know what? Ours is going to be just a little bit different. It's going to be really wide open, right? This wide open concept. So there's nothing really cramped or, excessively claustrophobic to these homes. They're
Right.
intentionally made to be small but large, if you know what I mean.
So, Daniel, you mentioned mortgages. Can people have mortgages on tiny homes? Are financial institutions willing to give mortgages on them?
I actually approached a few of the institutions, preliminary, right? And I
Right.
found that the Royal Bank, for instance, had no minimum in terms of square footage for a residential unit. And in fact, they gave mortgages on small apartments. I think the apartments were around the
Ah,
range of 400 square feet. And so the advisor that I talked to seemed to be very bullish on this concept of tiny homes.
so Daniel, what stage are you at in producing these homes? Because they're quite interesting from what I've seen. They're metal framed, et cetera. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about where you're at with the production and rollout of these and what the goals are going forward.
COVID slowed things down tremendously. Essentially, we're going to have a completion of a unit. Okay, all the interior finishing and the cabinetry and everything all complete by the end of March.
And this is March 2021.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in an ideal world, I think we're about a year behind, but I think some of the things that were really slowing us down as a manufacturer were all of the requirements, the government requirements, really. And I'm not saying that as a protest. I'm saying that if
Mm-hmm.
anybody really looks into this industry, and this is another one of those things that kind of cuts both ways, there's municipal leaders that are very skeptical about the tiny house movement. And the reason is because they need to know that the bylaws and all of the regulatory requirements have been considered in the production of the units. And so as a manufacturer and a consultant representing a manufacturer, I know that there's a tremendous amount of work that has to go into making sure that it's approved, that it meets all of the engineering requirements. And at the end of the day, this is all just good for the public. But because it's a new emerging solution, right, in our society, there's a lot of ambiguity there. And there may be a lot of, providers that maybe haven't gone through that lengthy, more time consuming, and to be quite honest, very expensive process of getting everything certified.
Daniel, without getting political too much, could some of the concern from government and regulatory bodies, could it be related to the possible effect that tiny homes could have on the housing market and the pricing values of existing larger houses? Is there any correlation there, do you think?
And it's really, my mind isn't going towards a political answer at all. I
Okay.
think what it is that essentially you've got two competing forces. One that's a market-driven force that has various different effects contributing to it, right? There's a housing shortage in British Columbia. I think that extends right across the country. There's Indigenous populations that are looking for housing solutions. There's a North American shortage. As we kind of stare this COVID reality in the face, I think economies are being decimated. And so, we're in this real flux of how do we adapt? What do we do? Do we go big? Do we go expensive? And on the back burner of all of that reality, there's the cost of energy. And so real estate upside and growth and square footage has been the model, right? It's like you take a lot size and you build as much as you can on it to maximize your real estate value. However, at what point does that become a future liability in terms of operating costs? And why are we building redundancy into something that especially when the mindset from hopefully our political side, and it's the only point I'll mention on a political sort of flair, is just that this are the values that we're chasing in a political sort of conversation, are they towards a climate reality, or are they tempering our use of resources, or is it more about reduction and trying to make things less disposable, right? And so those values will come through. And what I'm excited about is, I'm essentially a market guy. So I think that we want to encourage people to make the right choices based on science. But the market is the ultimate kind of, determiner. I think it's a very wise determiner without knowing that it's wise.
Having your finger on the tiny home pulse, before COVID, it seemed like there was a real trend towards downsizing and getting smaller homes. And here in Vancouver, a lot of people have downsized to capitalize on the increased value in property, where they've sold their property and perhaps purchased a smaller home, maybe an hour out of town, maybe in the Okanagan, the interior of British Columbia. But they've downsized and taken the profit from selling their house and put it in the bank or in other investments or whatever they wanted to do with it. Now with COVID, there seems to be a trend for people to move into larger houses because they assume there's a few assumptions. One, if I'm going to be at home self-isolating, then I might want to have a gym, and I might want to have room for people to come, for a close family to come stay for an extended period of time. I might want to spend more time in a bigger kitchen. I might want to have a pool in the backyard, those kinds of considerations. Another consideration is, okay, my boss is okay with me not reporting to the office every day. I only have to go
Hmm.
in once a week or a couple times a week. So I don't mind the 1 hour or 1.5 hour commute from the Sunshine Coast or from, again, 2 hours away or whatever the situation is. I prefer to have a larger home to work out of the house in. And the other consideration too is, okay, do I really want to put mom and dad into a retirement home at this point? I think they might be safer in a basement suite or in an in-law suite, as we say. So so that's some of the market dynamics that play in my mind. What are you finding? What are you seeing as far as that trend, or do you have your finger on that pulse?
Bernie, that was very well articulated, actually. And no, but they're all very, very valid points. And my mind goes to the market, really, and ultimately, in 5 years, 10 years, what will that decision, will it pay off in your benefit? And quite honestly, it could,
Hmm.
right? I'm not entirely sure. One of the things about the tiny house movement too is that I think there's a bit of a temptation to think that this is how everybody has to live.
Hmm.
And starting with the minimalist mindset, I mean, I know that you're quite involved with farmer markets, and you're very much conscious of the environment. I talked to somebody just recently who has four teenagers, right? They're living with four teenagers as a, I should not say they, as a single mother with
Hmm.
four teenagers.
Wow.
So there's no way that a tiny house would work for them in that particular stage of their life,
Hmm.
right? So, there's this type of thing where our lifestyles are somewhat dictating what and how we can live.
Hmm.
Now, in the case of somebody who's living in a downtown environment and they live in a condo, maybe it's a young professional group that when they bought their condo, they weren't allowed to work from home. And now they're finding, heck, we can work from home. So let's
Hmm.
maybe move out to the country, get a little bit bigger of a square footage. Let's get a few dogs. Let's grow some vegetables.
Hmm.
One thing that COVID has kind of taught us is that it's pushed us into a societal flux, right? We don't know really what the future will bring us in the next year, and
It's
it's
almost like we're going through the tunnel and we don't exactly know where the tunnel is going to come out to.
yeah,
We don't know what that opening. We're going to get out of the tunnel and we're going to look and say, oh, okay, so this is where we ended up, right? Just like
yeah,
at the beginning of the tunnel, i.e., the beginning of COVID, we all had certain ideas about what was going to happen too. Property prices we thought were going to drop, but they've skyrocketed.
yeah,
Demand has
yeah.
skyrocketed. What are some of the other uses that people would use tiny homes for, and specifically this style of tiny home?
Yeah, so when we first launched, we had a slogan called "Minimalism without compromise," and really, this was essentially there to capture the idea that if you want to live in a small space, you don't have to live in a kind of like a kit home or something that makes you feel like you're compromising quality.
Hmm.
So the niche that this particular manufacturer is going after is someone that can afford the very best, but because the very best is a small square footage, it shouldn't be unattainable for the majority of people, at least people that are serious about moving into a small space. Now, moving on to the kind of the first part of your question, I think the best place to kind of leave this is in the extreme section of the site. And so on the website where we talk about extremes, there are three featured
Where is
case
that?
studies.
Where should I navigate to on the site?
Oh, it's just to the left of gallery.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Can you see the screen now, Daniel?
Yeah, I can. Yep.
I see where you're going with this. So the ability to raise the house quite easily.
Yeah, automatically. Even we could put sensors in there, and so what this means, and from a large biodiversity impact, is that if you're building on a floodplain, you don't need to terraform acres and acres of land.
Hmm.
You could have sensors in there for seasonal flooding that as the water is raised, and now just click the little red dot on the picture, which cycles through the images.
Hmm.
you'll see that now you've got a raised water situation, and the little guy in the kayak. So you go it again.
And you might choose to have that, or you might not want the water coming right to your doorstep.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
More than likely you'd be trying to get above the water or out of the water. But as again, some kind of a boating chalet or even a clubhouse for, I used to be in a sailing club. This could be ideal for that. Just build a little bit of a dock on it with some slips, and wow, you got a nice clubhouse.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the concept, I would say there's the
Nice.
pedestal showing raising from the ground, right? And so
Hmm.
that cut section shows the technology. And so when I do say that we're using cutting edge technology, I mean, we really are. One of the case studies that's not shown as we progress through this section is actually that we can put the home on a rotating, like a pivot, and it can actually rotate with the sun.
Oh,
So yeah, so there's like so many things that we can actually do. Just comes down to adapting the right building application for the client's needs, right? And so maybe
and
scroll down. I'll show you that
Daniel, I'm
quickly.
curious about that with the rotating with the sun, because that would be a really cool feature to if nothing else, to feel proud of and show off. Check this
Yeah.
out, guys. Would it rotate automatically, or would you do it manually? Or I guess it could be both, right? Obviously, the manual would be probably cheaper, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, I've joked with Greg a little bit about it, and he's told me, he says you can do it automatically, you can do it, with a sensor,
Hmm.
you can do it manually.
Hmm.
And I said, well, I want to get one and put a real fast speed on it, right? And I mean, I'm joking here, of course, but I'm kind of letting my mind go down and think I could just
Sure,
really kind of spin my house around like a merry-go-round, right? And
sure.
um,
So here's something that comes to mind for me in that scenario is that okay, in the summer, when the weather is warm and you don't necessarily want the sun beaming in. You might want a little bit of relief from the sun and be in the shade. So you might
mhm.
turn the back facing to the sun. And in the winter, you might want the sun coming in to help warm up your house and to feel the warmth of the sun in the wintertime, which is a great thing up here, in the Great White North. And I think that would be really beneficial, probably from a energy saving perspective as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. These are all possible.
Hmm.
And so, yeah,
So
yeah.
in that case, there would be a return on investment in having that feature of turning and rotating the house to the sun.
Yeah, I will mention that out of the box, the ability to rotate these units in a mechanical automated fashion would be pretty expensive. With the initial rollout of our units, I think it would be, more the person who was leaning towards the novelty as opposed to the immediate
Right.
ROI, right?
Yeah. So this
To
is
be
kind
quite
of
honest.
blue sky thinking right now, and
Yeah.
the possibilities there, but the economics of it might not totally line up for most people at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the next one got an example of it in a dramatic snowfall location. And the difference here is that there's a receiver or a platform for something mechanical, because in a situation of a flood, the home can raise automatically.
Okay.
With snow, there's no buoyancy to the snow itself. And so you'll need to have a mechanical unit above to raise it. Now,
Mhm.
um, Greg, who's the owner of Befama, he's come up with this concept and said, hey, you know what, if you had a cabin that you wanted to go to for say 3 months of the year, and for example he lives up in Haida Gwaii,
Mhm.
so what he could do is he could go spend the time in his cabin, and then when he leaves he could just raise it up 10 feet,
Ah,
right? So that it's protected from um, intruders, vandals.
yeah, it has security implications.
Yeah, you could put in a 360-degree camera on the underside. You can see people coming.
Wow.
That's for somebody that is maybe really, really, concerned about, damage in a remote location, right?
Sure.
So I don't know if I'd go to that extent for security, but obviously people have different, thresholds and how they want to protect their investments and stuff. Yeah, so whether it's the snowfall issue here that we're seeing, or whether it's a security issue, these are all things that are meant to have you think. And then The final one is actually about fires. And this is something that is and should really be on the
Mm.
minds of people that are putting homes in areas, heavily forested areas. And you'll see as we scroll through this set of images, the unit itself actually has very little materials on its surface or the structure itself that are combustible, right? Because
Ah,
you're looking at glass and metal and aluminum,
mhm.
structural steel. So those little embers that may, flicker over and may start up a fire on a more traditional build, like say a cedar cabin.
Mhm.
Well, as you go to the next image, it shows it a little bit more close up, and it shows you these little embers kind of flying around in the air, and there's
Mhm.
nothing for it to really grab onto because it's not like an ember will hit glass and then ignite.
Right. So
Now,
it's not like kindling, and
that's right.
I know people might not know the details of some of the California fires. My understanding, and of course we have very similar situation up here to a smaller degree, but nonetheless very serious in British Columbia. Part of what is such fuel for the fire in California, at least used to be, cedar shakes on the roof.
Hmm.
It served as very good kindling for these embers that are landing on the house and started like wildfire, let's say.
I think the reason why the renderings have a sporadic tree covering as we've displayed, and we'll want to be careful to not use the use of like fireproof and all these kind of things,
Hmm.
is that it does offer a benefit, but it's not a catch-all solution. I mean, if we
Yeah.
think about a raging forest fire, if there was a forest fire bearing down directly in the pathway of this home, they get pretty intense. And so there is a path that, can pretty much destroy anything. But, we're looking at this as an improvement. And there's also the other idea that, you can move it, right? So if we know that there's a season, or if there's, a few days notice, and there's, the homeowner or the city or the location has access to a 50-ton crane, that's just a flat deck. You come, decouple it, move it, get it out of there, and you've protected your investment.
Wow, that's a big benefit. And Daniel, I have a question about the glass. I love the glass and how it creates this open space and a feel that the home is actually much larger than it is in actuality, um, because you're not confined with the walls being solid around you.
Hmm.
Just a question on a lot of people at different times, when they're changing, when they're doing different things at night, perhaps they might want to not have the visibility through the windows. Have you guys worked at all with electronic tinting of glass? What do you call that when you can darken the glass to make it opaque?
Yeah, I think the term is the photovoltaic solution. We haven't as of yet. I think that with initial rollouts, I know
Mm,
some of our wish list and our priorities focused more on energy efficiency.
mhm,
And so it was a welcome challenge to try and get an all glass exterior facade,
mm,
right, for perform really high in terms of energy values. Now, privacy, you're right, is a separate sort of thing. And I think that then starts to unfold as we have discussions with the potential client. How do we want to modify their daylighting? How do we want to incorporate privacy? And I would say that these are just site specific things, and they're questions that pretty much come up in any residential build. And so we can default to a lot of the mainstay types of solutions that would happen. Say you were to just build a cabin out in the woods, right?
mhm.
There's a way to do that. One of the things with, I mean, you can pull it up again or not, but you'll notice that there was translucent glass and opaque glass.
Right.
And so what happens is that if there's an area, obviously something like the bathroom, unless you're a bit of an exhibitionist and you want all the nature to bear your nature, you can make those glass panels so that the warmth of the sun and the light can diffuse through, but no one can see in,
Oh, okay, that's
right?
wonderful. Yeah.
And you can do other things like use the facade, whether it's a wood facade, like a black koya or a small strip or wide plank cedar in order to offer different kind of visibility and daylighting solutions. So there's lots of options, right? So he's emphasized something called small structures because it's effectively the home when we start to add to them and the modules. It's not a small space. So the bedroom itself, like it's 13 and a half feet wide. And so because there's not a lot of cramped feeling in the space, you're going to stand in this bedroom and you're going to look at it and you're going to go, wow, this is like a 12 by 12 bedroom.
Hmm.
Right. And so, I mean, I encourage anybody to take out a measuring tape, look at their master bedroom and think, how big is it? And think, wow, that's the living space that would happen in one of these units.
Wow.
Right. And so there's a certain luxury to this kind of unit because of it being so structural with a structural steel. You don't have to cramp it in with a lot of unnecessary structure or storage, right? Hidden around storage and all this kind of stuff, right?
So perhaps changing the mindset from bigger is better to small is beautiful.
There you go. So your emphasis on the aesthetic. I like it.
What does the name Bathama stand for? And am I pronouncing it correctly?
And Befama is actually a Polish name. Now, the owner's Polish.
Okay.
And his father actually used to run a factory in Poland called Befama something. And so this is just more of a personal choice from his standpoint to say, yeah, let's just call it Befama Homes. And he kind of liked it, and it had something, maybe kind of a feeling of like a family kind of space, although that's not what it really means. I think in Italian translation, the fama has something to do with a family, but I'm not too certain. So anyways, there's just a personal reference there.
Great. And my experience, and I believe that Poland is very known for its craftsmen, especially when it comes to working metal. Part of the reason is the huge shipbuilding industry there.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of craftsmen and machinists and stuff that I've run into in Canada that have come from Poland and brought their expertise here. And Greg would be one of those.
Yeah, he came effectively in the 80s and immigrated to Canada. And his facility in Richmond, it's a 40,000 square foot facility and a lot of really good equipment. And he's got this precision work ethic that is almost not seen today, right? His ability to create things in such high precision gives him a really, really good reputation in the high end residential market. And so I know one of the impetuses behind us coming up with this design was to say, let's take all the quality that we offer the ultra high end residential home market and try and distill it down to 400 square foot modules. And now all of a sudden, voila, there's this, this beautiful structure that is as good a quality as he can conceive of. And I think that as the reputation grows and spreads, what it means to be an owner of a Befama home will grow in equity, right? People will start to, that brand building, I think, is really, really important for the long-term strategy of the company.
And I think speaking about the background and the foundation of the company, we really enjoyed filming some of the larger homes that Panelex and Greg have produced metal paneling for. I think some of those houses were in excess of 5,000 square feet, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. So there's not really a minimalistic client there.
There's a lot of experience to draw on there that Panelex draws on, which is great. It's great to see that transferred into more environmentally friendly and minimalist lifestyle housing.
That's why it's pulling at my heartstrings. I think it's a pathway that is a virtuous one. It's where we need to focus, and we all have to kind of question, how we're moving, and which way we're going. And so this right. I think feels like the right path.
How much of the Earth's resources we actually consume?
Absolutely, Bernie. It's a really important question.
Excellent. Well, that's great, Daniel. It's been awesome learning more about Befama Homes and tiny homes. I think there's a lot of information here that'll be very interesting, I hope anyway, to our audience. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we go?
No, I think that was a nice wrap up. And, I mean, I like what you're doing and just keep up the good work.
Sounds great, Daniel. Daniel, how can people get a hold of you if they want to know more about tiny homes?
Really, the best way to get in touch with me and the entire team at Befama Homes is really just directly through the website, at befamahomes.com. So,
Do you want to spell that out for us, please?
yeah, it's Befama homes.com.
Great.
Befamahomes.com. Yeah.
So we'll transition into the other side of your life now, and we'll talk about the Plankset website and what you're doing with authors, which is quite fascinating too to anybody who's involved or thinking of writing a book. I think we'll take a short break and then come back with that.
Okay.
Great. Sounds good, Daniel. Thanks very much. And if anybody wants to reach Daniel, go to befamahomes.com and he'll be happy to correspond with you and talk about anything to do with tiny homes. Great.
Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to this Bernie Chats. I hope you'll subscribe, like, or share it with a friend. Feel free to leave a comment, and we'll see you on the next one.